Hello and welcome to another video and podcast on FantasyFootballScout.co.uk. My name is David and today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest talking points in FPL this week, which is of course what to do with Arsenal defender Gabriel. He was in lots of teams ahead of the Game Week 1 deadline, but of course in those final few minutes before that deadline passed, it emerged that he perhaps might not be in the starting 11 in the game against Nottingham Forest, which is exactly what came to pass. And of course he came on for that dreaded 1-point cameo for those of us who still had him in their teams, blocking many first subs that had done particularly well. In my team, of course, lost out on 9 points from Joachim Andersen. So I'm certainly aware this is a big talking point ahead of the Game Week 2 deadline. There's lots of people out there wondering what to do with Gabriel, and that's what the focus of this video is going to be. We're going to look at whether or not you should sell him, whether or not you can afford to keep him on your bench for another week. But if you are set on selling him, we're going to have a look at some replacements as well. Now, before we jump into that, this is an ample opportunity for me to remind you guys that we have extended our preseason prices on the Fantasy Football Scout membership, which can help you save up to 30%. And so it's not too late at all for you to sign up ahead of Game Week 2. A lot of the information that we're going to have in this video comes from the members area. So if you want access to that information in a higher level of detail with a greater level of interactivity, and of course, without having to rely on me passing it on to you, then Fantasy Football Scout membership is massively going to help you. But yes, we promised to talk about what specifically to do with Gabriel. Now, this video, of course, is about Gabriel replacements because I know that many of you are looking to sell him. The price changes, of course, are giving many of you itchy fingers because he hasn't fallen in price yet. I'm recording this on Wednesday morning. If you're listening to this on Thursday or Friday, that may have changed, but certainly there is a little bit of panic factor here. You may want to move quickly to avoid losing some value, and there's definitely some merit to that. Before I get into the replacements, I do just want to make a case for rolling that sub for Game Week 2, especially if you've got a bench that you feel can help you get through Game Week 2 without having to make a transfer. Because if you can go into Game Week 3 with 2 free transfers, that gives you the opportunity to actually do slightly more surgery to make this change. And of course, if you make 3 changes for a -4, you can also do the mini wildcard as well, which can help you jump onto those fixture swings for Chelsea and Spurs. So don't be afraid of holding Gabriel. That's probably what I'm going to do. I've got a team reveal video coming later today to help you understand that in a little bit more detail for my team. Hopefully that's useful for your team as well. But as I said, before we get on to the best replacements for Gabriel, if you're set on selling him, I just want to make sure that you consider keeping him for one more week just to give your team that little bit a higher level of flexibility for the coming game weeks. But yes, let's have a look at players who we feel are the best replacements for Gabriel if you are set on selling him. And so what I've done is I've had a look at the season ticker to see which teams have the best fixtures over the next 6 game weeks. Now, you will have seen a lot of this season ticker in the preseason to help us identify who's got good fixtures over the first 6. But with Game Week 1 out of the way, of course, it does start to fluctuate because you take that Game Week 1 fixture out of the ticker and then we're sticking in Game Week 7. The not too much change, but what we have seen is Arsenal have slightly dropped on the season ticker because, of course, a home game against Nottingham Forest is one of the easiest games from a defensive perspective. And that's what I've got it sorted by the way, just for the benefit of the podcast listeners here. You can sort the season ticker in the members area either by overall, which takes sort of an average, if you will, of attack and defense. You can just have a look at specifically teams that have good fixtures from an attacking perspective and specifically teams from a good defensive perspective. And of course, looking for a Gabriel replacement, that's what I've got selected here. And so the top 4 teams on the season ticker over the next 6 for defensive potential, I should say, is Chelsea, Man City, Arsenal, and Brentford, with Everton and Liverpool completing the so-called top 6 there. And what I've also got on the screen is teams that have done relatively well from a defensive perspective in Game Week 1. Now, it is a small sample size, so please don't read too much into this, but we can already have a look at a few emerging trends, you could say, especially when we think about what some of these teams did last season. And what I usually try and do when I'm looking for a new defender is I look at the season ticker to see who's got the best fixtures, and then I also go to the defensive section of the Fantasy Football Scout members area to see which teams have been defending well, by which we mean conceding relatively few shots in the box, relatively few big chances, perhaps also a low expected goals conceded score as well, and try and marry those up together. Crystal Palace at the moment, Manchester City, and interestingly enough, Nottingham Forest are the 3 teams that have yet to concede a big chance in the Premier League this season, which of course is very interesting, just as a side point in terms of Arsenal attack. They beat Nottingham Forest without creating a single big chance, which is very interesting and perhaps useful to know when we think about whether or not we're going to start Matt Turner in game week 2. As I said, more on that later in my team reveal. But at the moment, what we can see so far is that of the teams that have good fixtures, it is Man City that so far have defended the best, because all those other teams on the screen there aren't necessarily doing so well in the fixtures area. But in terms of who we're going to replace Gabriel with, I've picked out 3 different teams that are kind of being talked about in that replacement category, and then a couple of other also rans at the end that don't necessarily have the fixtures. So we're going to start this from a fixture perspective. So we're actually going to start with probably the most common transfer this week people are thinking about is Gabriel to Saliba, because that's a like for like. If you were invested in the Arsenal defence at the start of the season, you arguably think that they're still worth investing in. So it's a simple sideways swap. I can understand that completely. Although I'm actually going to provide a little bit of a devil's advocate here, and hopefully I'm not going to sound like someone who is going, "I told you so," or whatever. But for most of the pre-season, I was not really that interested in the Arsenal defence because I felt like they weren't as productive towards the back end of last season as we perhaps wanted them to be. And it was only, I think, Friday morning, late Thursday, can't remember, before the Game Week 1 deadline that I chucked Gabriel in my team because I had a spot and I was like, okay, look, if the Arsenal defence does improve this season and everybody else has got something here, it's going to hurt me, so I'll go for it. And so then them not keeping a clean sheet against Nottingham Forest was quite a useful confirmation for me because it just reminded me some of the reasons why I don't trust this Arsenal defence. And so we're just going to jump back a little bit to the way they finished last season, and then we're also going to look at who they're playing in Game Week 2, which is Crystal Palace. And so if you're making a straight swap from Gabriel to Saliba, I guess the question is, why are you making that swap? Do you feel like Game Week 2 is the right time to bring in an Arsenal defender? Well, I think the answer to that is no, arguably. And so we go back to how Arsenal finished the season. In their final 12 matches of last season, just 3 clean sheets. They were away at Fulham, then away at Newcastle, and then they also kept a clean sheet on the final day of the season at home to Wolves. So in that period, only 1 clean sheet at home, 2 of them away, 3 from a possible 12. If you take the Fulham game out of the equation, it's 2 from their last 11. And of course, when you add on the Forest game as well, still another game without a clean sheet in the Premier League. Let's compare that with Crystal Palace, their opponents in Game Week 2, of course, at home as well. The way they finished last season, they were full of goals. They averaged 1.8 goals per game in their final 10 matches of the season. They only failed to score on 3 of those occasions. And so it kind of feels like Crystal Palace are a team that can score against Arsenal this week. And in terms of whether or not we feel that Saliba can mitigate against that with some attacking returns, it's very, very difficult to be too confident on that one. Just because of what we saw in the Forest game, yes, he did get an assist. But do we feel that him getting an assist is a sustainable output? Well, not really. His expected goals involvement for the game was 0.03 because he had no shots and he created 1 chance in the game, which actually wasn't what contributed to him getting an assist. So it's very hard to argue that Saliba is going to have a sustainable attacking output. And so for that reason, I don't think Game Week 2 is the right time to sign an Arsenal defender because you're not, I don't think, going to get an immediate return there because I think Palace will score and it's very hard to argue that Saliba is necessarily going to get attacking returns. Their fixtures beyond that are kind of okay. Let's go back to the season ticker for Arsenal. Fulham at home, and then they've also got Everton away and Bournemouth away, which could be useful in a rotation, but do you want to be rotating a 5 million defender? It's kind of hard to get too excited about that. And of course, Game Week 4 against Man United, Game Week 6 against Spurs, they're 2 teams that we feel can score against Arsenal as well. So I think it's very difficult to make a case for Gabriel to Saliba for Game Week 2. Now, we talked about Chelsea, their top of the season ticker. I think that Ben Chilwell is probably your best bet if you want a replacement defender right now, based on what we saw in the Liverpool game. Now, what we've got on the screen is defenders sorted by penalty box touches from Game Week 1, and it very much confirms to us what we saw in that game, which was lots of times in the game where Chilwell was in a very advanced position. He, of course, got himself an assist. He was a VAR decision away from getting a goal as well. 4 penalty box touches in that game, and only Estupiñán and Dawson of Wolves had more touches in the box among defenders in Game Week 1. And of course, when you look at the season ticker as well, West Ham away, Luton at home, Forest at home, Bournemouth away, Villa at home, and Fulham away. some very nice fixtures in there. There's going to be a lot of attention on Chilwell for game week 3. And so getting in there 1 week early by getting in for the West Ham game could potentially help you out there, save a little bit of money based on the expected price rises going into game week 3. Now, you could say that game week 3 is the better time to get on Chilwell if you're rolling that transfer as well. So I still want to keep people remembering that rolling the transfer is not necessarily the worst decision here, because of course Chilwell is that bit more expensive than Gabriel. You might need a little bit of surgery to make that move, to be honest. And so game week 3 could be a better time, but every team is different. If you feel like you can get to Gabriel in just one move because you've got some money in the bank that you left over, maybe this is the way to go. Alternatively, if you're really set on a hit, this isn't too painful. And as I said, I think that this is a guy who is going to help you get some return on that investment for a couple of reasons. The fact that Chelsea managed to actually largely contain Liverpool for some spells is encouraging, bearing in mind that's going to be one of their hardest games of the season when they go up against West Ham, Luton Forest, Bournemouth. We can see clean sheets there. But also, even if they don't keep clean sheets here, Chilwell offers a greater chance over Saliba and indeed Gabriel, to be honest, in mitigating against losing that clean sheet, because of course 7 points against Liverpool without keeping a clean sheet from an assist. And if he timed his run a little bit better, or the pass had come a little bit sooner, could have been looking at a double-digit haul against a top team like Liverpool. So Chilwell is certainly an exciting option. Man City, of course, are also doing quite well on the season ticker as well. Newcastle at home, Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, West Ham away, Forest at home, Wolves away. And so I don't think this is a particularly terrible place to invest in a Gabriel replacement. But in what is proving to be a recurring theme here, I do think game week 3 is the best time to switch to a Man City defender if that's how you're going to get rid of Gabriel. And that's even if we see Gabriel leaving the club potentially in the next couple of days, because as I said, if your bench is good enough, I still think that's the way to do it. Because game week 2, I don't really want to sign a Man City defender for game week 2 because Newcastle look like in fantastic attacking form, and I'd be a bit nervous about putting anything out there that suggested that I think Man City are likely to keep a clean sheet here, because Newcastle, I think, will cause them a lot of problems. I think that they're going to put Man City in a situation where they're not able to press them as much as they want to. I think Newcastle can potentially beat that. But also, Newcastle are very, very good at clearly exposing a high defensive line. They did that against Aston Villa. And so Man City's defensive positioning in this game is going to be really interesting to see. They like to play a high line and force the issue with possession football. But in the occasions when Newcastle can get behind that, I think that they're going to score goals, because you don't actually have to create that many chances against City to score goals. It's just that, of course, they defend by limiting how often you can create a chance. And then, of course, use that to score more goals than you. That's kind of how they win games. So I think Newcastle are going to score here. So do I want to sign a City defender for game week 2? Absolutely not. But do I want to sign a Man City defender for game week 3 when they're away at Sheffield United, whose XG in game week 1 was the second lowest of the entire Premier League? Absolutely, I'd be interested in that. And so maybe that's the time to do it. Fulham at home is another nice one. West Ham away potentially as well. Forest at home. Wolves away. Really nice fixtures for City. How you do that, again, I think you have to wait and see here, because when we look at the Man City defenders that started against Burnley, there's not too much to get excited here in terms of attacking involvement. I think that the likes of Laporte, Walker, Akanji, Lewis and Gvardiol, when they do play games, are probably just going to be 6-point merchants, potentially 5-point merchants if they're getting booked for time wasting. Ake came out of this game with an expected goal involvement of 0.32, so maybe there's a little bit more to get excited about there. But really, we also have to think about the Pep roulette, and of course, Gvardiol coming into the club does make it harder for us to be as confident with some of these guys they're going to start. I think the big man himself on the screen right now, John Stones, is probably the best way to invest still, but we just have to wait and see, because of course we have to see how fit he is. He missed game week 1 for a bit of a knock, so I think if you're thinking about Gabriel to Stones, wait for game week 3. Another reason, of course, is he's 5.5, and you might need to do surgery to get a 5 million defender up to a 5.5. Now, I promised to talk about a few others, and these are actually slightly more affordable, but We'll start with Estupiñán, who actually has recently risen in price to 5.1, so you might already be in a situation where you're going to struggle there. Now, he's not a fixture pick, he's a form pick. You will see on the season ticker that his team, Brighton, are not in the top 6 for defensive potential, but what we saw from Estupiñán against Luton does suggest that he's a sort of player who can mitigate against losing his clean sheet, and indeed even getting booked, because he came out of this game with 7 points from an assist and some bonus as well, because the way that he plays is just incredible. So what you'll see on the screen is how many chances he created in game week 1. This table actually I think comes from Saturday night, so it doesn't take into account what people did on Sunday, but in terms of what was achieved on Sunday and then Monday, Estupiñán has finished game week 1 as the joint second highest for chances created. 2 of them were big. He had 2 shots on target. 2 shots in the box is also the joint most of any defender after game week 1. He was also in the top 3 for recoveries and net tackles. He was joint second for baseline bonus for pass completion, joint second in this game for dribbles as well. So those stats are specifically for the Luton game, which meant that he outperformed some of his colleagues like Pedro, who lost 13 BPS for being offside, for having shots off target, -3 for big chances missed, -7 for being tackled, -1 for fouls conceded. March and Matoma lost 9 and 7 BPS respectively for sort of similar issues, being a attacker and losing the ball or having shots off target. And so it does mean Estupiñán is well placed to score bonus, even compared to his attacking colleagues in games where they've got attacking returns. And so it means that even if they've not got necessarily the nicest fixtures from a defensive perspective, he seems like a bit of an auto start for most of the time. I was thinking about maybe selling him for game week 4 when their fixtures get worse, but it was only Luton, to be fair, so we need to see whether or not he can keep this up against other clubs. But he looks like someone you can just start and leave there, and he'll get you something. He's got a very decent floor and has a decent ceiling as well. One other person I also want to briefly mention is Henry at Brentford. He created 3 chances in game week 1, which is not bad against a Spurs side that's looking quite good under their new manager. 2 of those were big as well, which puts him in the joint top 3 for big chances created in game week 1. And of course, looking at that season ticker as well, they are the 4th best for defensive potential over the next couple of weeks. Fulham away, Crystal Palace at home, Bournemouth at home, tricky one away at Newcastle, but then they're at home against Everton and away against Forest. Very attacking player there, quite often in advanced positions, and actually is probably one of the easiest players to get to from Gabriel if you are set on selling him this week, because of course you can just drop down to a 0.5 defender. Of course, that is the advantage of selling someone at 5 million. You can, if you can find a good 4.5 million defender, and it does look as if Rico Henry is going to be someone who can do that for you this season. Well, as I said, a lot of this information's come from the members area, so one last opportunity for me to remind you to sign up ahead of game week 2. It's not too late at all. You can still save 30% on those preseason prices, and it's massively going to help your decision making for the rest of the season. But with that, I will leave you fine, folks, to the rest of your transfer planning, and I will see you next time.